Hi, I'm Jesse Gilstrap.
And I'm Drew Cordell, and you're listening to TV Binge Drinking on the Mandalorian mini binge, season 2, episode 4, chapter 12, The Siege. And, 5 years later, now that I've finished the title of the episode, I can tell you I am sipping on an adult beverage for the first time in the history of our show. Nothing too crazy, just a Shiner Holiday Cheer that has like a little hint of peach and a little hint of pecan.
Ooh, all right,
Yeah,
right on.
and just a little hint of caramel as well. It's a nice little mixture, kind of a calming beverage.
It's good to kick back with a good alcoholic beverage once in a while. I almost wish I was, but instead I am drinking something calming. Republic of Tea, Mandalorian themed drink. We're having the child green tea.
Okay,
So I'm actually drinking something themed to the show specifically, and not just vaguely or broadly tying it in any way, shape, or
right.
form. It's actually green tea, and I put a little bit of sweet cream in there just to
Okay.
jazz it up. But cheers, my friend.
Cheers to you.
It is tasty. The child, you make some good green tea.
Yes, the child has been a subject of controversial tasting good on our show since the beginning.
It's true. I will say before we dive too deep into uh, this specific episode, we basically mentioned at the end of our conversation about the heiress that we probably weren't going to get Ahsoka this week.
Right.
I feel like anybody following the show, it has that very serialized feeling to it, which is appropriate. If it's Star Wars, if it's Indiana Jones, frankly,
Yeah.
he had that serial adventure kick, episode of the week sort of thing, and that's all fine and good. And as far as that's concerned, too, this episode this week, I feel like does have a good sense of story progression. So even though it doesn't directly move us forward, it does have a sense of adding story to it. You get a sense of moving forward, which is good.
Right.
But what I learned between last week and this week wasn't anything spoilery, but I learned that Carl Weathers was going to direct this week's episode, and next week directed and written by Dave Filoni.
Uh-oh.
And any hint I had about could we or could we not get Ahsoka this week went out the window. I was like, there is no way
Right.
next week's isn't the Ahsoka episode. How could it? We could be wrong. We don't literally know yet. But how is it not the Ahsoka episode? Every episode this season so far has been written by Favreau,
Yes.
and next week it'll be written and directed by Mr. Clone Wars, Dave Filoni.
Right.
Come on, it's going to be Ahsoka, right? Like, I knew that going before I even watched this week's episode. I was like, I already know what this isn't going to have,
Yeah.
and I'm definitely excited to get to that point. But it's not like we had to get there yet either.
Right.
I do think that this week's episode it had stuff that I really really liked in it, and the stuff that I liked the most were kind of those big picture things that were kind of teasing ahead and starting to give us a greater sense of the mystery and the specific story that we're a party to. And I also thought the episode had some fun little moments and obviously had some really great child meme worthy moments as well. But I do think there's a risk, a tonal risk when you have too many cute moments.
Yeah.
But if you don't have enough substance beneath it too, then it's like this show shouldn't be just a cute moment show. I'm
Right.
sure there's an audience that would love just that, just the child goofing off and throwing up and cheering
Right.
at explosions. I'm sure that would be a great show for some people in the audience, but I definitely want a tonal mix. And for me, this episode, it wasn't a bad episode. I don't think it was even the worst episode of the series. It is my least favorite episode this season so far. And a part of it is kind of logistical things. A lot of it is, I didn't mention this on the Prisoner episode in season one, I don't think, but I was bothered even in that episode. They used a lot of wipe transitions
Yeah.
from one. Maybe I did mention it. I can't remember for sure, but
I can't
uh,
remember. We either had this conversation either on the show or when
or
we
just
weren't
yeah,
recording. Yeah.
right.
I do remember talking about it.
But you have one bland looking corridor to another, and you're wiping between them. And this episode did that on the base when they part ways. Mando takes off from the rest of the group, and they start wiping a lot. And I think they were doing it because they were trying to give a sense of time,
Yeah.
like to give a sense that they didn't literally just run from here to there in those exact seconds. They're trying to give a sense of the base being larger, maybe,
Uh,
and it doesn't really work. Like,
no.
and the worst part is the shot selection wasn't all that varied.
Right.
So in my head, instead of, it's not just about wipe transitions, it's about action choreography. And the action geography is so important. And it obviously doesn't have to be an action scene. It can just be, the whole idea is, you know, visually where, like, at any given moment where the characters are and why they are where they are, you know. Why are they here? Where are they going? What are they doing? And I wasn't confused watching that sequence, but it didn't have like the best sense of where everybody was really. Because I think instead of cutting from relatively generic shots of corridors, maybe you do a hard cut from a wide shot of, you know, Cara Dune and company, and then you have a tracking shot on Din Djarin, Armando.
Right.
You know, like simple little things, but they're important. And I don't want to pick on Carl Weathers too much. But he's kind of the X element in this case for me, just because this entire season so far has had really great action direction all along the way. And we get to this episode, and there's some good action moments, but there are also things that bother me like that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, ah, come on. Not that it's bad. I don't want to press that issue too hard, but I do think it brought things down just a little bit for me. Or how about the moment that Cara Dune decides to race off of that steep height?
Yeah.
And in and of itself, that's not maybe the worst part of it to me,
Right.
and crushing a Horatio speeder, but that's kind of funny. The worst part to me is when the speeder bikes come out of there and they go down the cliff face as well.
Right.
And I'm like, what? Usually, if the villains crash into each other, it's because the heroes raced down a really tight corridor or made some kind of fancy maneuver that forces the villains to move in such a way that they crash.
Yeah.
In this case, they chose to go down this cliff face.
Right.
Where were the speeder bikes supposed to come out from? Why were they forced to go out that way?
Yeah.
And they crash immediately. And it just felt like really silly to me. And on top of that, this is hopefully the end for now of me just picking apart this episode. But when Mando first arrives and we see the torn up ship, and Mr. Director himself, Carl Weathers, walks up and he says, "I'm going to get my best people on it. Don't you worry." and he turns to the only two people that are behind him and say, "Fix it up," you know,
Right.
give them works or whatever. And one of those people, the supposed best people that he can get, is working for the bad guy.
Right.
So unless there's something we don't know, like those really are the best people, or at least he thought they were, and they've been secretly working all along. You know, working really hard as a mechanic to prove himself and be like, "Don't worry, don't worry." Got him convinced that I'm a great mechanic, so that whenever Mando does arrive here with the package, because we know how this plot is going to go, I'll be able to track his ship. Seems like an elaborate plot.
Right.
Little things, little logistical things like that kind of brought this episode down for me.
Yeah.
Not ever where it was bad, but just enough where it's my least favorite this season so far, at least.
Right. Yeah, I really can't disagree with you too much on that. I had similar issues, not exactly the same, but I felt the writing was a little bit of a step down. There was a lot of convenient things, specifically the the mechanic working for, Moff Gideon, and is that part did kind of make me go, okay, this is just a convenient way to kind of move that story forward in a kind of sloppy way, even though I really enjoyed the reveal at the end.
Sure.
There there was a lot of like good payoffs and good you know little bits and pieces of reveals that were satisfying, but the way we got there wasn't best executed. And again, I think part of that goes toward Carl Weathers, but I think part of it also goes toward Favreau because the writing isn't as tight.
Yeah.
Because he's kind of been on top of his game these last few episodes. I think his writing is a bit better than the previous season, um, where it was a lot more spotty. This is a little more akin to some of last season. I still think it's a little bit better than kind of the least episodes of the first season, but I agree with you. This is probably the weakest of this season for sure. But I really did enjoy just some of the little moments, especially like at the beginning when you kind of we talked a little bit last week about how the Razor Crest kind of having all these problems was reminiscent of Empire.
Yeah.
And we kind of start with the same sound effect of the Falcon engine dying. Like that's the first thing you hear this episode is like an engine dying.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I immediately thought, okay, well, they really are going for that. What I've kind of picked up on, and seeing Mando and the child kind of work on the ship together. Uh, I think I do kind of agree with you. It's still a funny moment. And it's cute, and I enjoy it. Like I'm less harsh on this one in this particular moment because I think it does kind of fit in the story, and it fits with the atmosphere they're kind of going for. But the school scene where he eats those um, like blue milk mint Oreos or whatever it is, steals them from the kid that wouldn't share. That scene's really funny, but what is it? What is there to it other than it just kind of being a meme moment? or something to make people go, "Oh." I agree with you on that. I mean, I still like it. I still enjoy it.
Oh, it's
It
funny.
is fun, but I do agree with you. It is kind of a tonal thing. I did like the action in a lot of ways, but there were moments that I kind of found myself thinking that this should be I should be more engaged in it than I am. And I don't know if it is the choreography of it, or just the pacing of it, but something just felt a little off. There were some great little moments
Right. Yeah.
and some great beats, some good action beats, but again, when they're going off the cliff, I thought it was really kind of dumb,
Yeah.
the speeder bikes, like you said. But then when the other ones come down, they make it and they're chasing them. I thought, oh, this is kind of a fun, almost reminiscent of Indiana Jones.
Yeah. That's why I had to mention that earlier, specifically for that moment. Yeah.
Right, like it's kind of similar to uh, the tank chase or the tank scene in Last Crusade, where everybody's trying to get on that tank, and there's a little bit of fun with that. I like, you know, Grief trying to keep track of them, and but then here's another one of those head scratchers. He wasn't able to turn it a certain way, and one got by him, but then the other one was like right up on top of their craft,
Yeah.
and he was able to turn it completely around and blow them off. Like that part was kind of like, yeah. I mean, it's fun, but again, the logistics of it kind of cares more about the just the results than the execution, and I think that you know that kind of shows. Going back to what would have been the weakest, or what I previously thought was the weakest of the season, The Passenger, what kind of sets the two of those apart is that every sequence in The Passenger, every kind of adventure sequence was so well executed, and it was logistically done. Like the ice spiders in particular, like the way they moved, the way they came, and Mando's reaction, his strategy, and trying to get rid of them, getting overwhelmed with them, ultimately not being able to have that big hero moment, even because there was just too much for him, and the ship was damaged, and it ended up being those X-wing pilots that kind of saved their tails. This kind of goes for the big hero moments, and I don't have a problem with that in in principle, but it sacrifices a lot of the attention to detail for that, and I do think that that kind of robs it of a little bit of its shine, so to speak. But it is fun, and I gotta say I did enjoy Cara Dune being back, and Grief Karga. I was not excited about Horatio Sands, uh, but I did not hate him as much as I did. I can't even say I really hated him in season one, but I wasn't as annoyed by him uh, in this episode.
Can I be honest though? Like my biggest problem with that character, Mithral, the
Yeah,
Mithral in this episode was more the way everybody else responded to him.
right,
Just because I feel like they were a little bit too harsh, and I kind of want to know more about this dude before I want to crap on him.
right.
Like he did some, what was the word? The some creative accounting. or
Yeah,
something of that sort. And it's like, in what regard? Like, was he desperate for money? Was he trying to get something for his family? Does he have a family? Like, was he on particularly hard times? See, like, define creative accounting. Like, this feels really harsh for whatever he did. Like, I kind of want to know he's a piece of crap before I'm okay with treating him like garbage the entire time.
right.
It's not terrible though. I mean,
No,
it mostly worked. Like, just that character alone. Like, he wasn't annoying like he was in episode one.
no. And there were kind of some fun little action payoffs with him too. And I did kind of chuckle when he reacted to his speeder getting destroyed in that whole kind of silly, almost stupid sequence, but it's still fun.
Yeah,
Um, I thought,
it's mostly partially stupid just from the getting from A to B moment.
right,
Like, the logistics of getting from A to B. It's like you really need to build that stuff
yeah,
so that it can work. You don't get to just jump wherever, you know?
right,
It's like in a video game where you're just hoping that the physics are going to work in your favor.
yeah,
You're like, oh, if I jump down here, my legs aren't going to break because the physics in the game aren't built to make my legs break.
right, right, yeah. That's a perfect example, and and it shouldn't be it shouldn't be your decision for uh storytelling on this platform, but I kind of going with some more positive things. I and this is going to be one of the weirdest positive statements I've ever made, so get ready. But uh the the revelation that the base was a lab, and of course we don't really go into huge details. Kind of just get a hint of what's been going on. I think we know cloning is kind of at play. This was very kind of almost reminiscent of the only scene that I like in a certain terrible movie known as Alien Resurrection, uh, where they find all the Ripley clones. Um, they're not. I mean, it's not nearly as grotesque and not nearly as drawn out as that, but it kind of has a similar creepy vibe to it of finding that. I wish there was a little bit more um, to this, or at least to see. Maybe they're not ready to pull back the curtain too much just yet. But I did kind of enjoy that little revelation in this. But I have to say I'm a little I'm a little annoyed that we have to make a euphemism for midichlorians.
Ilm count.
Like yeah, we have to say M count. Like really, it's we can't use that word now.
But we can reference it specifically. But if we actually said midichlorian, everybody would lose their minds.
that that really cracked me up. The M count, uh, but I also going to the end. I said that it was kind of a little clunky how we get there, but I do enjoy kind of the reveal that Moff Gideon's got some Dart Troopers up his sleeve,
Yeah.
which is a really cool. And we're digging back in the EU now, specifically from the Dark Forces video games. uh, and just a really cool part of the past. And Filoni and company have brought EU characters back, or uh, before, into the fold, specifically and excellently with Thrawn in Rebels.
That's incredible stuff. Yeah.
So yeah, it just really cool. And I'm always kind of curious to see what they might bring back next, or what character, or what um, type of trooper, or whatever they might pull from the EU in bringing into this new canon. And it's cool to see that. I want to see how that plays off. We've gotten Giancarlo Esposito now in two little uh, bit parts in the last two episodes. I think I agree just on your assessment of Filoni directing and writing the next episode. It's safe to say that Ahsoka will probably be the focus and be in it. Who knows? But I'm kind of interested to see more of Moff Gideon soon. I don't think it'll be next episode. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it will be. But I'm kind of interested to get more of a motivation from him, and kind of get a better grip on what is exactly at stake and what is
Right.
going on. I feel like, he was just introduced at the end of season one, but as we're trying to progress along and we see that there's a larger story, we kind of need to know what that is. And again, it's we're at the midpoint of the season now. Um, and in some ways, I feel like we've progressed, and in other ways, I don't feel feel like we had. Like last week, the heiress really it did its own thing, but it did kind of speed some things along. Kind of felt like we were getting some footing, and I don't feel like we lost it necessarily in the siege, because I do feel I agree with your sentiment that it does kind of keep its own progression going. Um, but I don't think it walked too much further, though. And I feel like we need to kind of be moving a little bit further ahead than we are. And again, this these are kind of fresh takes. I watched the episode once today, and then I watched it again kind of in the background getting ready to talk about it. So I've seen it twice, and I'm gonna give it a B. Uh, Again, I don't think it's the worst episode, because I don't think there is a quote unquote worst episode. Nothing's
But
been
it's not a
worse than
bad
it
one.
be
Yeah.
right, but it's been the least of this season for sure. And like I said, there's some cool stuff in this episode, and there's some fun moments, but like you said, there's not enough substance beneath it to really elevate it. So this one, it's kind of a fun, solid episode, and that from that perspective. But that's kind of it. And I give the edge to the passenger for being the more well put together, fun, solid episode of this season, because it was a little more firmly footed in its storytelling, and had a better sense of direction uh, to it altogether. But again, I feel like we've kind of been harsh on this one, or it sounds that way, because I really did enjoy it, and I enjoyed the fun. But I found myself thinking these things more than I did um, like, oh, this is great. I and so it's kind of hard to ignore those feelings.
Yeah, B is exactly where I would fall as well, which is a good rating. That makes it a solid episode. It's solid is not bad if that's the worst the series gets in general, because we've never gone below a B. If we never go below a B, that's a really good run. I just hope to see more A's, you know.
Right.
But that's, like we still don't have a bad batting average
No.
overall. The Passenger is a better episode because it works in its story and its logistics. It just didn't have the heft or any more sense of character or story purpose to be an even better overall episode. But this one had some interesting stuff going on, but felt just a little bit too slight and like it had a lacking sense of itself. Like it's almost like a first draft. Like it didn't
Right.
do everything it needed to do. And I agree too that that goes back to Favreau's writing as well because uh, picking on Carl Weathers' direction is more about the some of the action moments, but there were also writing moments that felt underdeveloped as well. So, uh, but still not a bad episode. I do think, and this is something that I don't always want to do. I'm not a big fan of speculation too much. A little bit can be fun, but I'm not always a big fan of that. I just kind of like to ride with the story and let it do whatever it wants to do. But I did walk out of this episode thinking a whole lot about where this fits in the lore of Star Wars as a whole. And I specifically thought about something thought about before, but the child seems to timeline wise come from the exact moment of Anakin's birth.
Aha.
So so that is one thing, and it's like we don't really know where Anakin came from,
Right.
but he seems to have been a miracle birth
Right.
and generated by the Force somehow, hence the high ilm count. But but if that's true for Anakin, then how is that connected possibly to the child?
Right.
Like, where do they come from? This could get really interesting, you know.
Yeah.
But then on top of that is possibly related, possibly not. Who's to say? What is this experiment? Is it cloning? And if it is cloning, here's the next part: is it Palpatine related? Snoke, Palpatine, because that's where that story goes in the movies,
Right.
or is this its own thing? My question walking out of this episode stepped more into, boy, how close is this to the lore from the movies versus doing its own mythology?
Yeah.
And I don't have obviously any hard answers, but I really walked out of this thinking about those geeky mythology ideas. How rooted is this in the Skywalker saga, so to speak?
Right.
Because a lot of other references are, as we mentioned, references to Clone Wars and Rebels and to the expanded universe stuff.
Yeah.
There are a lot of details that come from that world, which is great. But I'm just curious, where does this story fit in the Star Wars schism? I'm really curious now, almost more than ever, with this whole experimenting notion, which we already knew there was some experimenting going on, but just kind of tipping that way even more and seeing whatever figure was in that.
Yeah.
Like, I really curious to see more moving forward, which we probably won't get any answers for a while. in that regard.
Probably not. At least not for a couple of episodes. I don't expect, if we get any answers this season, I don't expect to have them until episode 7 at the earliest, and if we don't get any in 8, we will obviously won't get any. So I don't know what the long term plan is, obviously, and like I said, like you said, don't like to speculate too much. I do think that it is very possible that you're on the right track. And I didn't necessarily find myself thinking the same exact things that you did, but I have thought some of the similar conclusions. And Filoni was very close with Lucas because they worked together on Clone Wars, and I know a lot of his vision stems from his conversations with George as well. So if there is connective tissue with those plot lines, I do think it's possible that maybe it's something Lucas intended to expound on at some point and just was never able to. It'll be curious to see where it goes. And I would like to see maybe some of those details, especially since his involvement in the sequel trilogy. He ended up stepping away because they, you know, I'm not going to speculate on the reasoning because people, are all internet experts and like they pushed George away or whatever. But they chose not to really go with his a lot of his ideas that he had presented for them, and he just chose to step away from the sequel trilogy. Not that he would have been that a director or anything like that, but they did talk to him. They had conversations with him when they bought Lucasfilm. So it will be interesting to see if these are some Lucas ideas that that are manifesting themselves in the Mandalorian, and if they will somehow connect also to what we do see in the sequel trilogy, or if they are going to be more standalone to the Mandalorian. I obviously we don't know. I do think one of the cool things about this episode, it does bring a lot of questions that are very interesting to fathom. How we get to them and how they're revealed, that's one of the bigger problems of the episode. But still, it's a fun episode, and I really did enjoy it. And I hope, kind of in a similar way, I think Bryce Dallas Howard had a much better first outing um, than Carl Weathers, but I would love to see Carl Weathers do another episode
For sure.
because I didn't think he did a terrible job. Just some of the things just weren't to my taste, and some of them didn't work logically. But I would love to see him do it again because obviously Bryce, when she came back, knocked it completely out of the park. Arguably the best episode of the whole series. So we'll we'll see where that goes. Uh, but it was cool to see Carl Weathers of name. Of course, I knew he did it because it gotten out that he directed it, and I follow him on Twitter, so I saw him retweeting and tweeting a lot of stuff about the episode. But that was cool. I'm glad to see him involved, not just in front of the camera but behind it as well. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what happens next week with Filoni writing and directing. I'm pretty excited about that.
I would like to briefly mention some positives for this episode, just to say that I did like the way that we came back to Cara Dune and Grief Karga and
Yeah,
seeing them with the cleaned up town.
yeah, yeah,
That idea was actually really nice, and I like that. And along that same note, the apparently named Captain Carson Teva, our
yeah.
space trooper,
Right.
the state troopers of space, as you put it before. Um, I really like that he's been a player, a continuing player, and suggesting too where the other forces of the galaxy are, and that they're noticing something is afoot. And it
Right.
makes you wonder how that's going to play as the storyline coalesces. It suggests that we're not just going to run into Moff Gideon. We're going to have, some new alliance kind of players too. And it's uh, I like the references against digging deeper into Cardoon's past and Alderaan. That the Alderaan references is really well played.
Yeah.
And that gives you a sense of reality and world building that works really well, and it's important to making these things work. It's not just action beats. You want a sense that these are characters in a world that lives and breathes, and that they're connected to one another. So that stuff is nicely done. Just had to mention that stuff before we wrap things up. Like some
Right.
positive attributes to this episode too. But regardless of which, I think that wraps up the combo for this episode. If you're done as well, sir,
Yes, sir.
so we'll convene for the writing and directing of Dave Filoni next week for whatever that episode with Ahsoka will bring. Uh, until then, my friend, thanks as always.
Yes, and watch it be a Horatio Sands standalone backstory episode. We find
Yes.
out how he fixed the numbers. It's going to be like the Wolf of Wall Street of Star Wars. That's the episode we're going to get. Get ready for it. But no,
Now I'm excited for him to be all drugged up and crashing. But we'll convene for the Horatio Sands episode next week
yes.
on more TV binge drinking. Stay tuned.